This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
Made a big shift in how I looked at what being a healer and a doctor really meant.
Very threatening and damaging to the human gut microbiome.
I made a conscious decision that I would not let it destroy me, that would have no purpose.
I couldn't eat anything and I would get debilitating stomach aches, and I was like, what's the point?
You have to prepare your mind in order to make a paradigm shift.
And it sounds really cliche, but it is to go with the flow.
How do people do it? How do they upgrade their operating system?
Well, first things first, you got to upgrade your health, right? You got to fix your gut. You have to have the energy on a cellular level to have enthusiasm and happiness and detoxification pathways and all the things that actually help you just exist without feeling like your back's against the wall.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the health journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? In Season 1 of The Shift, we explore the fascinating field of gut health and help you discover what is really going on with your digestion, microbiome, and health.
The gut is amazing.
Changes our concept of the human body become useless to the healthcare system.
We're always shifting. Your genes are shifting, your microbes are shifting, everything is shifting.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. In this series, there's a ton of information, stories, and anecdotes. My hope is that some of it will resonate with you enough that it will inspire you to make a shift in your life. But before we go on this journey, I want to ask the question, are you ready to shift? There are several things that we need to shift successfully. The first one is to be ready, to be in a point in your life when you really and truly want to make change. I've heard the stories of thousands of individuals that have come through my naturopathic practice, but I was still humbled and honoured to hear the stories of my experts and also the people that they have helped to make a shift. Pedram Shojai is a doctor of Chinese medicine, filmmaker and all-round crusader for health. He's also known as the Urban Monk and has a book of the same title. I thought he'd be the perfect person to ask, how are most humans existing at the moment?
I don't know if they're existing. I mean, I think they're actually like diminishing in flickering to the point where they are panicking because they feel the life force leaving their bodies. They feel the happiness leaving their bodies, and it's a big problem. So I mean, between the toxins in the food and the endotoxemia that comes from the bad bacteria, and the false operating systems that make you think that that purse is going to make you happier, or that new truck, or the whatever the hell thing you've been told you need is going to make you happier. It just pulls you out of what's really important in life, which is, picnicking under a tree and going for a walk and, just the pure, simple things in life. So I think a lot of people have fallen into a worldview that gets them to say, screw it, I might as well just eat this, so who cares anyways, the Titanic's going down. And so there's just this lack of enthusiasm and optimism that comes from a faulty worldview. We need a new narrative, right? A lot of people just, you go to church, you have a formula that life was supposed to follow. And then, church ends up molesting altar boys, right? And so things break, right? And so we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. We don't have a morality. We don't have a common ethical fabric. And we don't have like a formula for like the good life that doesn't involve over-consuming and destroying the planet. And so we live in a very difficult time. And so unless you upgrade your operating system to not be a tick on the back of planet Earth and be a part of the solution and be a healthy person that's sustainably living and growing and thriving, I think it's just a very confusing time and place to be.
How do people do it? How do they upgrade their operating system?
Well, first things first, you got to upgrade your health, right? You got to fix your gut. You have to have the energy on a cellular level to have enthusiasm and happiness and detoxification pathways and all the things that actually help you just exist without feeling like your back's against the wall. And that comes from all the things that I'm sure you've already interviewed. I've done a lot of work in this space, and we know how to get healthy, we know how to stay healthy. The question is, what's between you and those decisions, and what do we need to do to get there? And there's plenty of resources there. So you got to get healthy, and that actually it's really perfect, because when you start making healthy decisions for yourself, when you start buying organic, you start supporting practices that also support the planet. When you start getting sustainable products, you start supporting companies that are helping sustainability happen, right? You become part of a life-affirming narrative that starts with you and then expands out from your life outward. And so you are now kind of a bastion of hope and stability in your household, in your community. But if you're talking about all this stuff while eating, Oreo cookies and like drinking a Diet Coke and trying to save the world, you're going to crash and burn. The world's not going to save. Everything's going to falter.
Pedram mentioned that we need to upgrade our health. Making this shift can take time, and it's really about understanding what on earth got you there in the first place. Dr. David Perlmutter is an integrative neurologist and one of the world leaders in progressive healthcare. When we're trying to connect the dots with health, we sometimes need to be a bit of a detective to find the reasons why we've ended up where we are. We talked about how this can happen in theory.
Well, I think first of all, you have to understand the mechanisms and understand that what we're doing is really, at the end of the day, connecting a whole slew of seemingly disparate dots. So let me just walk you through, let's say, my statement that I think genetically modified foods may lead to brain degeneration. And I've never said that before, but I'm trying to pull things from as far apart on the scale as possible. Could there be a connection? Well, let's walk through the various dots that ultimately allow this to at least be conceptually a connection. By and large, globally, the reason we have genetically modified food is that it allows farmers to use these genetically modified seeds to plant crops that are resistant to the use of an herbicide that kills weeds called glyphosate. So, GMO foods, seeds, lets farmers spray the food that we eat with glyphosate. Glyphosate, it turns out, is very threatening and damaging to the human gut microbiome. Significant damage happens, and that paves the way for increased gut permeability or leakiness, as was demonstrated by researcher Dr. Stephanie Seneff at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now we have increased gut permeability, increasing systemic inflammation. Those inflammatory chemicals damage the brain and are associated with things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism, depression. So this then allows me at least to conceptually create a pathway whereby this pervasive use of genetically modified seeds could threaten the health and functionality of your brain.
If that piqued your interest, don't worry, we'll be covering glyphosate and genetically modified foods at a few points in the series because there is a lot of research about it. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. I'd like to share my story with you now because it might give you a bit of insight into why I'm so passionate about helping people to make their shifts. I'd say I've been through a lot of shifts in my life, and quite a few of them were very significant. My story started in Melbourne, Australia, where I was born. I grew up in the western suburbs of Melbourne with my mother, father, and 4 siblings. My childhood was very challenging. My father was an alcoholic and quite an angry and violent man. I grew up in the throes of domestic violence, being physically and verbally abused for much of my childhood. As a result of this, I had very low self-worth growing up. A lot of my life was spent in fear, and this affected my mental health and also my self-esteem. In high school, I suffered from depression and also began to get significant acne, which further affected my self-esteem. Quite stereotypically, I turned to drug use from an early age. First with smoking marijuana, which turned into many days off school. At this stage, I was spending more and more time out of home and staying with friends. This progressively got worse, and long story short, by the age of 15, I ended up homeless and addicted to heroin. So at the age of 15, I'd been a heroin addict and living on the streets of Melbourne for several months when an opportunity to make my first big shift occurred. In a twist of fate, an angel tapped on my shoulder and offered me a way out. My best friend was moving to North Queensland with her mother, and they offered me to come with them. Hesitantly, my mother decided to let me go. So at the age of 15, I left my family and everyone that I knew, and I moved to the Daintree rainforest in far North Queensland, some 1,800 kilometres away. Moving into a completely different environment and out of the toxic situation that I was in completely changed my trajectory. Undoubtedly, this shift completely changed my life, but it wasn't for several years later that I really began my healing journey. Being on my own at a young age was of course challenging, but I was fortunate to meet a family there that I soon grew to love. Jenny was a mother and she became a bit like a second mum to me. It was also the first time in my life that I'd experienced the effect that illness could have on someone, because Jenny had an autoimmune disease called systemic lupus. Lupus is normally a progressive disease, and I spent the next few years watching Jenny's condition get worse and worse, and concurrently I noticed that her medication cabinet grew and grew. But Jenny never seemed to get better. Her condition got worse and worse, and I remembered thinking that there had to be a better way. And this is what sparked me to study naturopathy. The next big shift that I had was moving to the Gold Coast to study naturopathy. It wasn't until I was immersed in this world that my own health began to shift. When I began my studies, I was still smoking cigarettes, binge drinking, and had acne and depression. In the coming years, as I learnt to look after other people, I began to slowly shift my own health, mindset, and life. Little by little, I healed from my past traumas and began to love myself again. I balanced my hormones, quit smoking, and reduced the alcohol I was having. What I know now, looking back, is that healing is a journey that has ups and downs. Sometimes it can take big things to motivate you, while other times you need to chip away slowly. I got a phone call one day while I was on a uni break, and it was Jenny's daughter, Bonnie. Bonnie told me that Jenny had passed away. She was only 52 years old. Jenny was the first person I loved that I'd ever lost. It was a hard time, but it strengthened my resolve to help people to heal, and I've been on this pathway ever since. I tell you this story because I know how hard it can be to shift. But what I do know to be true from my own story and from working with thousands of people worldwide is that we have an amazing capacity to heal, change, and shift in the right direction. Sometimes we make small shifts over time, which lead to big results in the end. However, there are a lot of cases where a big event led to a huge shift in someone's life. I think that sometimes we look at people who we perceive to be healthier, fitter, more successful, or that have got it together more than we do. We forget that that person has a story and has made their shifts to get to where they need to go. And for us to get to our destination, we need to do the same. This could be shifts in diet, habits, mindset, or environment. But what I know for sure is that when you make a positive change, you will shift. As I mentioned, I've worked with thousands of people worldwide, and I've observed so many shifts occurring. What I've found is that for some people to make a shift, they need a big wake-up call. Signs and symptoms are your body's language telling you that something needs to change. But what starts as a tap can end up as a sledgehammer if you don't sit up and pay attention. This was the case for Dr. Vincent Pedre, who was kind enough to share his story with me.
I was in a bike accident. I can't remember. I know that I was biking into a parking lot, and I must have hit some rocks, and I ended up crashing into the floor head first, knocked unconscious, and ended up in the hospital. And up until that point, my life had been about drive and pushing and excellence and being the top student and a 4.0 GPA. And it was that moment that made me realize that I wasn't taking the time to live life, that I needed to change my perspective. So it's like it took that head injury to get me to realize that the way I was living my life wasn't serving me at the time.
Why do you think it takes sometimes a really big event like that for us to realize these things?
I think because we're not listening. And so we've got to hit our heads against the wall. I mean, for me, literally, I hit my head on the pavement. And I think if you don't listen to the cues, that the signal becomes louder and louder until you finally listen. So you can learn your lesson. Because ultimately, we're here to learn lessons and to evolve. You know, it's just a question of, will you evolve? It's more a question of, are you listening? Are you willing to listen? And are you brave enough to listen in a way that gets you to evolve so that you change your way of being? I mean, that's when I decided that I was going to start to reprogram the way that I was. And that reprogramming continued when I started meditating, because that's really what started reprogramming my brain. The meditation got me to not be this type A stressed out teenage kid that I was, into more of this calm, Zen-like person who now, many years later as a doctor, can take a very nervous patient and calm them down just by my presence.
We are so proud with what we've created with season 1 of The Shift, but there is more to come. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a thing.
The Shift!
I loved that question that Dr. Vincent asked. Are you listening? I believe that events like these give us an opportunity to take stock of where we're at and to be a catalyst for us to make change. As humans, we can experience times of loss and pain. It's part of the human condition. These events have the ability to shape us, and our response in these times can determine the shifts that occur as a result. One of the remarkable people I met as I travelled around interviewing people was Dr. Felice Gersh. Felice is a passionate gynaecologist that has worked with patients for over 30 years to help shift their health. I asked Felice what the biggest shift in her life had been, and here's what she had to say.
Well, this is like a really painful thing, but I actually had 5 children, and I had a son who died. So talk about a shift. And so that changed my outlook on everything, you know, because it was so much suffering. So I think it made me even more empathetic. And I almost have like a sixth sense of people's emotions. So I think it was a hugely transformational event for me. I made a conscious decision that I would not let it destroy me, that would have no purpose. You know, people even said to me, like, how can you go on? It's like, let's see, what is my choice? Should I go jump off a cliff? Like, what is that going to accomplish? And I already had a daughter at that point. So that's not an option. So it made me understand that tragedies happen of all sorts to many people, and you have to make gigantic decisions about how you're going to deal with it. And so that was a huge shift for me in making a very conscious decision that I was going to continue. I was already a doctor at that time. I was in training in my residency, that I was going to really dedicate my life to always doing the right thing, to help other people and to help women deal with whatever tragedies or challenges that they would face in their own lives.
Here we have gastroenterologist Dr. Marvin Singh.
Well, there are a lot of major events that occur in someone's life that leads them to have major shifts. I mean, one of the first shifts I had was in leaving my home state, because then I was on my own, learning how to be an adult without, parents necessarily there. And then the next best and the next big shift was when I met my wife, and then another shift is when we had our first kid, and then our second kid. And then I guess professionally, the big shift I had is, in the story that I told earlier, is when I realized, that I needed to make a change in how I practice medicine and to actually be more of a healer than a doctor necessarily. And made a big shift in how I looked at what being a healer and a doctor really meant, and how I took care of patients. And that's probably the latest big shift that I had, professionally, career-wise. And now I guess I'm in the middle of another big shift, and that's in taking all of this information and bringing it to the world as one of the thought leaders in integrative gastroenterology. We're always shifting. Your genes are shifting, your microbes are shifting, everything is shifting. So the body was meant to shift.
Marvin is 100% right here. We are always shifting. In every moment of every day, we have the opportunity to shift. Kate Reardon is also an expert when it comes to shifting. At her award-winning health retreat, Natural Instinct Healing, she has guided thousands of people through deep transformational programs where she helps them to make profound shifts. I know this because I've been one of them, and Kate and her team have been integral to my personal healing journey. Given that Kate helps so many people move through their trauma and make their shifts, I wanted to know what the biggest shift in her life had been and how she was able to navigate that.
I think maybe not the biggest one, but the one that's certainly coming into my mind right now is when I was 36 weeks pregnant with my first child. My husband, Pat, was diagnosed with cancer, and it just rocked my world because I was on this cusp of about to give birth, and I was also faced with his death. And it put me into this really deep and beautiful healing process where I truly, truly came to the realization that nothing is permanent in this life, and that change is always going to occur. And it's how we respond to change that is truly what matters. So for me, that whole experience, it was so challenging and so scary and so debilitating in so many ways, and yet it brought me the most profound teachings of my life. And I think the biggest one out of that is we have no idea what's going to happen. We really don't as humans. You and I sitting here right now, we're going to be completely different people this afternoon. We don't know what's going to come up at lunch or what we're going to talk about, who we're going to meet, who's going to be on the road, what we're going to eat. Like, there's so many things that are shifting and changing constantly. And the biggest shift that I've made in my life, and it sounds really cliche, but it is to go with the flow. So that whatever comes up, whether it's like, that person's got cancer, that's happening, this is happening, that's going on. It's like, okay, all right, let's dance with this, not deal with this, let's dance with this. Because I feel like before I was much more of a control freak. And I also was under this belief of, we get sick when we've done something wrong, which was a huge shift for me to break through. And also, really, really, really trusting that everything that I'm experiencing is for a higher purpose, even when I cannot see it in that moment. So when Pat got sick, it was shocking. He had a massive tumour in his colon, and I was about to give birth. And then when Ruby, my daughter, came into the world, she came into this beautiful place where I was just so surrendered and open that every moment was a miracle, because I didn't know what was going to happen to her, to him, or any of it. And so I try and keep that with me all the time. And when I find myself getting in a contracted state, getting worried, getting stressed, getting stuck in my mind, which happens all the time, I just take myself out of that moment by, everything's okay. Every little thing is actually okay. And if it's not, then it's going to shift. And it just helps me to align to that bigger purpose, bigger mission, bigger meaning of me being in the world outside my circumstances or my suffering or my pain body.
And is that something that you recognised in the moment, that it was beautiful, or was it something in hindsight that you discovered?
I knew that it was for a bigger purpose, but that didn't make it any easier. I was pissed off and angry and sad and all of the emotion. But I knew deep down in my heart that it was meant to happen and meant to be. And certainly now, you know, when we look back on our family and even things that Pat and I have been through, what it brought us was such enormous gifts that people say to me all the time, would you go back and change anything? I'm like, not a single thing. Because what I received from that was so much more potent, and it couldn't have come in any other way.
What was your process of healing through that after it was done and dusted?
I think I didn't really process it until I had time. So he got sick, and then I literally had a baby. I was still very much in the running of my business, and I had to keep 2 people alive, really. And it was very, very much life and death. So I was on survival mode for, I would say, a good 2 years. It was just like, okay, get through today, and then get through the next day, and then get through the next day. And it wasn't like victim, I've got to get through the day. It was just like, okay, she needs feeding, he needs this, I need to ring that person. Like, it was just very much survival mode. So that when I had my second baby 2 years later, I really allowed myself that postpartum to have space, to grieve what I needed to grieve, to let go of any emotional debris, and to really be soft and be vulnerable and be open. And I was really fortunate. Pat had a speedy recovery, incredible cancer journey, like just phenomenal. And he did it in his way, which I'm really proud of. Our baby Ruby was thriving, the business was thriving. So I had space. And when I had space, I just let myself be with what was there. And what was there was a lot of fear, a lot of just worry, a lot of pain and suffering. And I just let myself cry and stay in my pajamas all day. And I ask for help when I'm so bad at that. And I let other people take care of me. And eventually, which is so hard for me because I'm the carer and I'm the strong person and I'm the one that keeps all the shit together, you know. One of my friends said, Kate, you are so good at keeping together and so bad at falling apart. And it's true because I never let myself. So when I finally let myself just be completely open and allow whatever was in my body and in my mind and in my heart to have room for movement or expression, then I just started feeling so different about so many things, and I do feel softer and I do feel more in my feminine energy than I ever have before. And it's because I finally let myself be vulnerable.
Such a powerful story here from Kate. I don't think many of us reflect on our healing journey in this way, especially not while we're going through it. I also really resonated with what she said about it being easy to hold it together, but harder to fall apart. How many times have you held it together or pushed through so that you could survive? To shift, we need resilience, but we also need to be able to be vulnerable so we can honestly examine things and recognise what we need. One of the first things we need before we can make a change is the right information. If you have a why behind what you need to do, it can empower you to make the right decisions. Seeing a specialist practitioner, reading up on things, or even listening to this podcast, it's important to be aware of what's happening for you and what your options are to move forward. Dr. Ailey Cohen is an integrative rheumatologist from New York City. I asked her what approach she takes with her patients when it comes to helping them heal.
I think a lot of patients who come to me, no matter whether they're perfectly well and have no real medical complaints, all the way to, really sick people, the questions about gut sensitivity or feeling of bloating or whether certain foods cause any type of irritation, which can happen with healthy foods as well, of course, even to junk food. One of the first things I always start patients thinking about and convincing them about is this whole gut microbiome topic, which a lot of people have never even heard of before. And I often give out some very good New York Times articles that I think are beautifully written and some other source besides myself. that will help win them over on this, kind of thinking through this idea that they have critters living in their gut, which is not easy for people to stomach. No pun intended. Anyway, but what I try to get people to think about is, I think starting with a good, removing some of the horrible foods or some of the things that may be contributing to any kind of gut-related symptoms is number one. Of course, talking to them about water is something I talk to, is a big issue. And then discussing the idea of probiotic foods, prebiotic foods, and even taking a supplement for probiotic, which is not always first on the list, again, because of cost and availability. It's more about behavior changes and food choice. So, I start with that topic very early, perhaps even the first topic I come up with when I talk with patients, because I want to lay the foundation of how important the gut is to pretty much all health and prevention.
As we move through this series, there's going to be some big concepts that are going to shift your understanding of things and challenge what you thought to be true. When we are making change, we can't keep doing what we've always done. Einstein once said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them."
You have to prepare your mind in order to make a paradigm shift. How do you do that? You have to have the tenacity. 1 hour a week, you walk up and down the aisles of the periodicals. You look to see what grabs you, and you just do the deep dive. 1 hour a week. You study functional medicine. 1 hour a week. You study food sensitivities. 1 hour a week. You study about holistic approach to thyroid. It doesn't matter what you study, but it's the tenacity, the consistency that creates the environment for the paradigm shift. And for every one of our patients, you want to be healthy? You need to take ownership for yourself. But it's overwhelming. You're not trained in it. You don't know the language. You don't know what all this stuff means. So 1 hour a week, you learn this. And in 6 months, you've got this down. And you and your family have vibrant health.
That was Dr. Tom O'Brien. What about you? Could you put aside an hour a week to educate yourself on a new way of being? To make a shift, we need to look at all of you. What are all of the factors that have led you into this situation? We're always looking for a magic bullet, for that one thing that will fix us. You are not your symptoms, nor are you your disease. These are a result of your unique makeup and the environment that you're living in. You met our patient Katie in episode 1. Katie had a lot of multi-system issues, but what bothered her the most was her severe acne, fatigue, and the constant bloating. I asked her what she did to start her healing process.
I went and saw someone who saw me as a whole person instead of a symptom or instead of a history or instead of, just this one thing. They were questioning everything about what makes me me. And that was massive for me because I have always had basically no confidence. And I walked out of there feeling confident in my health and doing something about it. And I guess that was a massive, massive change right there and then that day, that I deserve to be healthy and I deserve to be happy. Once I started to realise the impacts that I was having on my own health, I guess I realised there were really, really vicious cycles that I was living in, whether it was, patterns of behaviour or patterns of thinking or the environments that I would put myself in, or just little things that I let be okay that I would never let happen now, and realising that we can actually be different. We can actually have difference for ourselves.
Most of us have the habit of ignoring a health complaint until it gets to the point where it becomes bad enough that you can't help but look at it. One of the things I talk about in my book, Get Well, Stay Well, is that imbalance is easy to treat, but if you let it progress, then eventually you will have a disease process which is much more difficult to turn around. To make change, we first need to be aware of what is happening in our bodies, but a lot of us are so disconnected. I spoke with UK nutritionist Jenny Tichy about why she thought people weren't paying attention to what was happening in their bodies.
I think we just live in such a fast-paced community, a fast-paced life at the moment. I think people are so affected by the messages that they receive. I don't think they're just the advertising messages as we used to think they were. They are subliminal messages from our teens looking at images on Instagram and watching, tacky programs on the TV. That's my opinion, about, body image and this is the way you should look and this is the way you should be and this is the way you should behave. We've actually lost touch with the effect of eating, and I mentioned community, I mentioned the social element, I mentioned the eating local, we've lost our connection with that, and we're so focused on the one outward image of our bodies that's where the disconnect has occurred. There was a phrase I read the other day of something about the issue with weight is don't make weight the issue, and that's the point. If we stop thinking about our weight and our image and we start thinking, for example, and I've always said this to parents with children, if you've got something, whether it's the quality of their hair, whether it's making sure that they make that next hockey match or whether it's a skin issue, focus on something, but don't focus on their weight, and then we can start thinking about energy and we can start thinking about vitality and we start thinking about feeling good within yourself, feeling confident, and then weight will just happen. The right weight, the optimal weight, might not be what they look like on the TV, but it'll be right for you.
What's your philosophy around health?
So I believe that health is a holistic thing, and I know that sounds perhaps a bit woolly to say that, but I genuinely believe that all of these people that you see, like you say, that are on social media that show one aspect, perhaps the way they look of their life or their amazing holidays of their life. We've all got a backstory. We've all got a place we've come from and a place we sit in. We don't need to share it with the world. I'm obviously focusing when I talk on social media about trying to influence people positively. But what's really important to my mental health, my physical health, is family. Making sure that my family are well, happy, we're in a safe place, etc. That we have a healthy interaction, not only ourselves, but with other people. We have the ability to communicate what we want to communicate, and we have the ability to travel, to eat well, to just to be balanced in life, to live life. We only get one chance here. This is about making the most of what we get given. And to me, if you are healthy, if you have optimal health, you have the greatest number of options, the greatest number of decisions to be made. And that's a wonderful position to be in. But if you are in poor health, suddenly all focus has to become on that one thing before you can even think about making lovely decisions about life and where you go next on your holiday or whatever.
There is so much power in people's stories, and it really inspires me to watch people go through their healing journey. Sometimes the healing journey can be quite short, and other times it can take quite a while. A traditional naturopathic saying is that it takes 1 month of treatment for every year you've had a health complaint. When we're trying to help your body to heal itself, there are no quick fixes or shortcuts. Which of course can be very frustrating because you wanted those symptoms to be gone yesterday, and you may have months ahead of you to really get to the root of the problem. You heard from our patient Katie earlier when she talked about the start of her healing journey. Katie went through a lot of ups and downs along the way, but she persisted through her treatment. I asked her about her experience in going through this healing journey.
That was the biggest thing for me with my gut health. I started improving it and then it just went to shit and I couldn't eat anything and I would get debilitating stomach aches and I was like, what's the point? I've spent all this money, I've taken all these supplements, I've made all these changes. I'm just back where I was, and that's how I felt. But the thing is, I always trusted in the process. Even if some days I went against it mentally, I would always trust in the process. I would always persist with my supplements. I would always persist with these changes that were recommended to me. I would always persist with the things that I felt other people knew would benefit me, even if I didn't feel like they were at the time. And it works. The system works, even though you have days, weeks, even months sometimes where you don't feel like you're going forward, you are. And it's little by little that you make change. And I think we forget how long it takes for problems to arise and to continue. And when we want to address them, we think it's going to be this quick process. And, all of a sudden I'm going to have this one supplement, I'm going to feel better. And that's just not the case. It's not this quick fix. It's not this one thing needs to change. If you actually approach it properly, it will take a while. But the thing is, you will see progress and you will see little changes if you want to find them. And once you see them, it empowers you to realize that things are getting better. And it's, realizing that you're learning you. And while learning the information that affects you, the most important thing is learning your body and learning the way you interact with things, because everyone is so different. And your journey to that date means that you are going to be so unique compared to everyone else, because the interactions that you might have with food or behaviours or people is impacted by your past. And I think that is where you start to realise that that's what this journey is about. It's about understanding you, and it's about understanding when you feel okay and when you don't, and learning what that means.
There are two things that you can take away from Katie's story here. The first is that sometimes the healing journey is not linear. You may have symptoms that are up and down, and you might encounter roadblocks that you need to work through in order to progress. The second is that healing takes time, and you need to trust the process and trust that given the right input, your body has an amazing capacity to heal itself. There has been so much great advice in this episode, so I'd like to summarise what we know about what it takes to make a shift. First, you need to be aware of what's going on in your body. You need to acknowledge where you're at and really understand what's happening for you. Secondly, build a support network around you. This might be a specialist practitioner, being part of a community, or even turning to friends and family who will support you on that journey. Thirdly, small shifts lead to profound changes over time. As long as you're making progress, you are working towards your goals. Next, look out for roadblocks. Expect that there's going to be some bumps in the road. Healing is not a linear process, and if you plan for these speed bumps, you can overcome them and keep progressing. Lastly, trust the process. Healing takes time, and as long as you have the right input, your body will heal itself. Things to look at include diet, lifestyle, stress, and emotional health. We're going to cover these areas more as we move through the series. Given that this whole podcast is about shifting, I asked each of my experts this question. If you could give just one piece of advice to somebody that wanted to make a shift in their health or their life, what would it be? Here are some of their responses. You'll hear more of these through the rest of the series too. First up, gastroenterologist Dr. Marvin Singh.
If you give your body the ingredients that it needs to do the job that it wants to do, that it was born to do, it will do the very best that it can under those circumstances.
I agree completely. Under the right circumstances, your body will heal. Now we have Pedram Shojai, the urban monk.
Start with your next meal and look at the ingredients and ask, did they come directly from Mother Earth, or have there been steps of processing along the way? And even if you're like, oh, that's wheat flour, like what is that? Someone had to bang it out of something. Like, do you understand what that food is and how that became food? And really start to question the origin of everything that goes into your mouth, and that will then create an operating system that will allow you to be more discerning of who you become, because you will become that food.
You are what you eat. Such a common saying, but so, so true. Next, we have nutritionist Angela Pfeiffer.
Along the journey, you're going to need to find people that have the same mindset as you do and wanting to make changes, or they've already made changes. Somebody that you can hang out with, some group that you can belong to get the support system and the connection to make things happen.
What Angela is saying is find your tribe. Support is so important when you're making a shift. journalist and filmmaker Cale Brock has this to say.
You know, just asking yourself these questions, challenging these ideas that we've adopted without really thinking, I think is the first step in inducing any sort of shift, because it opens us up to possibility and new ideas.
Challenging what you know is something that we're going to do a lot of throughout this series. Great advice. Next up, author and integrative doctor, Dr. Vincent Pedre.
The shift begins with you, and that begins with a shift in your belief system. Sometimes what I tell my patients is that it can be as hard as you want it to be, or as easy as you want it to be. And I think it's as easy as that. If you think it's going to be hard to change your diet and your lifestyle, then it will be hard. If you decide to tell yourself a different story, that it's going to be easy, then you can live that story. And I know it sounds so simple. They're like, well, it's so hard to change a lifestyle. I'm like, but what if you tell yourself the story that it isn't hard, that it's actually easy, that you can do it? What if, imagine that and just make it so.
This is such great advice. The story that you tell yourself really does make an impact on how well you shift. What did author and psychologist Christine Hassler have to say?
Look at your self-critic, because that really, if your inner critic is still the loudest voice in your head, making any kind of shift is going to be challenging. So start with your relationship with yourself. Really ask yourself, if I talk to my friends like I talk to myself, would I have any friends?
What Christine says here really builds on what Dr. Vincent mentioned. We'll explore more concepts like this in episode 10. Next, we have integrative rheumatologist and author Dr. Ailey Cohen.
I think we have to cut ourselves a break and understand that this is a journey. And when you tell people that it's okay that they've done what they've been doing, but now that you know better, I think it's much easier to help people make some of those changes.
I agree with Ailey. We are much too hard on ourselves. Give yourself a break. As long as you're making small shifts, you will get to your destination. Diane Ryan is a psychologist specialising in helping patients with eating disorders and addictions. She says,
talk to somebody. Talk to somebody. Talk to somebody. Connect. Don't keep it a secret. Because that's the only way that we can unveil the shame and be able to step into our power.
You don't have to do this alone. Find your support. Sometimes we can doubt ourselves and wonder, how will I ever actually do this? Lastly, I loved what Kate Reardon had to say.
You can do this. You really can. We have everything we need in every moment to do what we need to do. And it might not be that breakthrough straight away, but just knowing that we can shift is probably the most powerful thing I could reinforce in someone else, just to remind them that you can shift.
Are you liking the shift so far? I'd love you to rate and review this podcast so that we know about it. In the next episode of The Shift, we're going to discover how your digestive system really works to extract those nutrients from the food that you eat every day.
Coming up on The Shift.
Some people think that this could potentially be a place where certain important microbes might live.
The effect on our digestion.
No way to justify gastric bypass surgery.
Protein is like a pearl necklace.
Peristalsis increases to make room for the new food. Your pancreas starts squirting juices.
And this is one of those instances where a drug like a proton pump inhibitor would seem pretty safe.
We've got this huge tube that runs through us.
By now, you might be beginning to wonder what the health of your gut is like. To find out more, take our free online assessment at theshiftclinic.com/quiz. It only takes 5 minutes and you'll get a great report with some suggestions to get you started.
The Shift!
This series is produced by Must Amplify. Hosted by Katherine Maslen. Executive producer Ronsley Vaz. Music and sound design by Shade Furlong. Thank you to all of our experts. For more details on them, go to theshiftclinic.com/gut.
Still listening? Reviews help us know that we're hitting the mark with what you need and help us to shape future seasons. I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few moments to leave us a review. I would love to know what you think.
The Shift!
Thank you for listening.
Every listen or download of this show
and hence this voice
directly funds the ending of sex
and human trafficking.
A voice for a voice.
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 Find out more at amplifyimpacts.com.